We're wrapping up the afternoon with two amazing panels. First up, I'm excited to announce the Wicked Problems of Account Abstraction that's going to be hosted by Evin, CEO and co-founder of Disco.xyz. So she'll be moderating. And then I'd like to also invite up to the stage Richard, co-founder of Safe, Stefan, co-founder of Gnosis, Luis, co-founder of Gelato, and Kristof, founder of Pimlico. So give it up. Let's go.
Oh, here?
I think you need it.
All right, GMD Gens, thank you guys so much for hanging with us through a very toasty and interesting day, full of rigorous conversations and getting away from the protocol and into the party. So for this afternoon's discussion, we're going to keep things hot and spicy, just like the weather around us. These gentlemen with me, of course, need little introduction, though, of course, their work is listed here behind us. We're going to kick things off with Luis. Let's talk about the fragmentation elephant in the room right now. We've discussed many different forms of technical implementation, but of course we need a consensus, as we are in a consensus-based technical world. So does Gelato have a roadmap for upgrade beyond EOAs that you expect the market to follow? And if not, how is your team thinking that this market will converge on account abstraction, if not 4337 alone? Are you guys looking to Coinbase, Alchemy, Blockdaemon, and other large bases to gather momentum? Are you looking to some leaders with outsized social voices to signal what to do next? So how does this meme come into being? Because account abstraction means a lot of different things, and it's got to mean a smaller number of those things for us to implement it.
Wow. I don't even know where to start. But yeah, I guess the question is, what is the roadmap in the Gelato camp for account abstraction?
Yeah, we've got a lot of fragmented potential approaches.
Yes.
Some of them different, some of them compatible. So what's Gelato's take here?
Okay, I guess you're setting us up for a bit of a spicy panel there. But yeah, I think overall it's, I mean, at Gelato, obviously we have a very general definition of account abstraction. You could argue that we have been doing forms of account abstraction ever since we started our automation protocol, because at the end of the day, the automation protocol gives developers and their users an on-chain smart contract agent representation, and then has separated actors sending transactions on their behalf, with which sort of follows one definition of account abstraction. Overall, I think what's really important is that the interface layer is following suit here. And at Gelato, to be honest, we are a bit more on the back-end side, a bit more on the low-level side, so we don't really do that much here, but I think that's where the biggest sort of hurdle to adoption is right now. There's a bunch of different approaches. Obviously, we're very tightly integrated with the Safe, and we have an amazing account abstraction SDK with the Safe team that is not following the 437 standard, but is completely in production. It works well. It works with nice paymasters like Gelato One Balance that you can use to pay for transactions for users on all different chains and so on. And obviously, it's really cool to also see standardization like 437. That is a really good idea, I think, to standardize the approach. But yeah, I think the fragmentation you point to is really a very tricky issue, because at the moment, what we forget is we have to convince every front-end developer out there to somehow integrate with this. And an EOA actually has a very nice feature, which is interoperability. Everybody already has like MetaMask on their UIs. Everybody can work with MetaMask users. With account abstraction, you suddenly have a smart contract wallet that wants to be deployed. Suddenly you're asking a front-end developer to deploy a smart contract for a user. That's a bit scary for some of them maybe. So it's definitely a different model, and we still have to do a lot more there to make it convenient and so on for smart contract for front-end developers to integrate this stuff. I think that's where currently the adoption is lacking a bit. It's basically a bit harder than we thought it would be, I think.
Great reminder. People eat with their eyes first, and that top layer of UX is going to take us to the promised land. But before we have that full stack, Kristof, I know that you have a slightly differing perspective here, repping the 4337 Mafia. Why is everyone not going all in on 4337 right now? What is the deal with this interoperability fragmentation challenge, and how does your team take an opinionated stance on the side of Safe's neutral technology that differs from Gelato?
Wow, but really pitching us against each other. Well, I would say ERC 4337 solves one of the main problems that we've encountered when it comes to the modularity and the interoperability of smart accounts, right? Is that before everyone had to build their own relayer system, right? And so, great players like Gelato came about who sort of gave a really amazing solution people could just plug into. But I feel like now with 447, it really does allow for a way to achieve this decentralized relaying without having to lock yourself into any one provider, right? You could decide to start using Pimlico today, and then, if you're dissatisfied, you can very easily, change some RPC URLs, do, very quick refactoring, no smart contract changes, and, start using a different provider. And so this is kind of, I think, the vision of Web3, right? That like, if you're dissatisfied, you can always switch very easily, and you don't need to sort of suffer from these lock-in problems.
All right, so we've got a big anchor in the right of egress from this corner. Richard, as the neutral safe party in the middle, we play nice with everybody and enable builders to follow different approaches to this meme of account abstraction. But we also have many actual implementations of safes that are starting to integrate these improvements out in the wild. So with millions deployed today, what does the near future of interoperability mean for these addresses? Are we just going to focus on where these safes are implemented in the home chains where they live? What does it mean to have account abstraction in a multi-chain present?
It's actually a very interesting problem because also we have worked together with Gnosis on different solutions for this for a long time. Because often what you hear, hey, we want to have this approach that we have with EOAs, you have the same address on all chains, it should be possible with smart contract accounts. And to some extent this is true, but when you look a little beyond the first step, it's actually quite challenging because what we see is even if you have the same address, which is not possible on all networks, you get into a state where smart contract accounts, the power of smart contract accounts is that they are flexible, that you can configure them depending on your needs. And it's very hard to really ensure that they are in the same state on all chains. And then you have something that we call state drift, where then potentially you own a safe on address A on Optimism, but actually you don't own the safe on address A on Arbitrum, which then brings you the problem, okay, how do you ensure that they're always the same? How do you prove this? And actually there was a very interesting article from Vitalik, which actually was inspired also by Martin and a lot of the research that we have done on the safe side, where it was really this, what you said, the home chain model, what you also mentioned, right? Where it's, okay, you choose a home chain, in a perfect world you can choose it, and it's not one dedicated chain, but let's take Gnosis chain as your home chain, and then you have storage proofs, utilizing zero-knowledge proofs, for example, that you prove on other chains that you own on your home chain the safe. This is nice, super nice idea. It's we're currently also, there have been some prototypes looking into this, but I think the ultimate way would be that why this is maybe the technical level. The users should not think about this, right? What we want to do is we're gonna generate the building blocks so that for the users, this is all abstracted away. They potentially know I want to interact with different use cases, which might ultimately translate to different chains, but they should not have to think about, is this now on my home chain or something else, right? And yes, to really abstract this away, we need tools like Gelato, and also we need 4337 where we have defined interfaces for interaction.
So speaking of Gnosis Pay and offering a full stack of solutions that take the guesswork out of more complicated interactions for individuals, would love to hear, Stefan, tell us a little bit more about who's using Gnosis Pay right now and how this larger global footprint of millions of new users closely engaged with TradFi enables an opportunity for more abstracted experiences, but sits in the challenge that we've just described.
Yeah, very good question. So Gnosis Pay is a project that we started about, I would say 1.5 years ago, with the goal to remove the gap between on-chain payments and real-world payments. So we are integrating into the traditional payment rails of Visa and MasterCard to allow you to actually use the crypto that you have anywhere where Visa and MasterCard are accepted. And that allows you effectively to operate and pay with 80 million merchants worldwide. And obviously it gives a lot more utility to the funds that you have on-chain in your non-custodial wallet. So in terms of right now, Gnosis Pay is still early stage, so we just launched the product a couple of weeks ago, and people can order the first cards. The first cards should be shipped probably in October or November. I think the big potential here is that we are building a bridge between those two worlds. Right now, like most crypto activity is for crypto users. Like if you look at like the applications that are currently being used, it's crypto applications for crypto users, and we don't really try to open it up enough to a larger audience. And I think the reason for this is simply that it's very, very hard to do. And talking about Visa, MasterCard and payments in general, it was definitely a journey, or is still an ongoing journey, where you understand how complicated the other side is and how difficult it is to find agreements where we can actually talk to each other and create actual real utility. But I think account abstraction right now, what we are just discussing, is finally at the stage where we can offer a user experience that is on par with what users have been used to from Web 2. So it is the right time to build those bridges and allow users to come in and do actually a lot more what they usually do outside of Web 3, and eventually have all of their activity in Web 3. We like to compare this to Skype, right? Like I was one of the first Skype users back in the day. And at that time I could do Skype calls with my friends, peer-to-peer. It was great. And at some point, Skype introduced Skype in and Skype out, so I could actually call my mom or my parents via Skype. And if you look at today, like all phone calls are done via voice over IP. So every phone call goes over the internet. And we have to get to the same with financial transactions. Right now, I can do peer-to-peer transfers anytime on any network easily to anyone. Great, but only to peers that are already in crypto. Now we're building the bridge that allows you to do this with anyone outside. Like any merchant now can accept crypto that any one of us has, and they're safe. And then hopefully at some point adoption is big enough to have enough leverage to get them actually move right into crypto altogether without them even understanding or noticing that they're interacting on crypto. And account abstraction is the fundamental basis for this, in my opinion, because otherwise we don't have a path towards the user experience that we need. And I think in terms of finding standards and so on, I think this will mostly be driven by where we have most users, to be honest. So in that sense, I would say WorldCoin is a great example, even though I would say the WorldCoin project itself, you can think about whatever you want, but it definitely created the highest number of safe accounts, and there too also is the biggest adoption driver right now for account abstraction in some way. And so I think those projects that are able to generate the demand and generate actual on-chain utility, they are the ones, their technology choices will also inform a lot of the other decisions in the end.
Yeah, you can publish white papers all day, but if you can't put numbers on the scoreboard, does it matter? So let's talk about some of those actual improvements, those UX improvements that you mentioned, such as the ability to cover the cost of gas fees for users, so we can get that sneaky onboarding, help them feel like it's a Web 2 app and not incur the same kinds of costs that the rest of us are used to. So Luis, earlier, you were showing us in a workshop exactly how to do that, but you also noted that the Gelato Pay account has to get topped up, and someone has to be continuously paying to cover the costs of those transactions. So at Gelato, how do you guide developers to decide when to stop paying for transactions? Or is this an individual contextual choice? How basically, when do we as builders decide that it is viable for people to pay on their own versus covering those costs ourselves?
Yeah, so I think to reach mainstream adoption finally, we have to completely do away with the notion that a user will pay for a complex gas market, because that alone requires so much onboarding. There's so many questions when you're confronted with that ugly view of that MetaMask thing with the emoji of an ape and it's like some numbers and like what's going on, right? so I mean, even after all these years in crypto, when I try to onboard someone new, I think for me it's normal in MetaMask, but then I realize how awful this stuff still is. And a lot of the awfulness comes from the fact that we're asking users to deal with complex economic concepts like a dynamic gas market for block space. That's horrible. So, I mean, similarly to how Netflix doesn't send you a bill for their AWS EC2 compute instance every month based on how much you stream on there, right? Like, similarly, applications should be at a stage in crypto where they can abstract away these real costs. They won't go away. Now, arguably with rollups, like I announced today that Gelato is launching rollup as a service, you can definitely reduce these costs by a lot by choosing a construction like a rollup Validium or something. But at the end of the day, they will be there. The point is they have to be borne by the developer, by the application developer. And that doesn't mean that you cannot make any money. You should just try to monetize your user base in a different fashion that is also more amenable and more agreeable to them, like a subscription fee or whatnot. The problem is, to be honest, that I understand why this is not the case in crypto today. It's simply too expensive. You cannot launch a startup and pay for your users' gas cost. You will go out of bankrupt the next day probably. So yeah, it's just, I think the infrastructure is getting ready now. We have rollups now, we have Validiums coming on, we have rollup as a service. All of this will help developers to actually deploy applications that have cheaper infrastructure costs. And at that point, you can eventually reach that tipping point, that sweet spot where, yes, you can front these infrastructure costs and ideally still, I don't know, make money on trading fees or whatnot that are ideally breaking even or even profitable for you at the end of the day.
Stefan, I see you nodding. Any hot takes to add there?
I fully agree. Like if you really want to get a lot more users, then well, they should not think about gas costs at all. There's no point in even you have to find other ways of monetizing it effectively. And I think users are fine with paying fees, but they're not fine with understanding how a blockchain transaction is priced. So that has to entirely go away, and I think that we have all the means to do that. And yeah, we also, the way how we structure Gnosis Pay is also, of course, every user is a safe account user, it goes without saying. But they also don't have to think about gas costs at all. So it's all fully subsidized. Right now it's deployed on Gnosis Chain natively. If we see number of users going up, then there's a clear path to actually have it deployed on the layer 2, where again, gas costs are fully covered by us. So I think the concept of asking users to pay for every transaction and think about what they have to pay, that just doesn't work at all. That is something for infrastructure providers to think about, how they pay for it, but not for the end user.
Do you think the ability to make this decision is based on the model that you have or the war chest that you have?
Well, of course, kind of need both, but...
well, you can go to Gnosis Chain today on the safe and have free transactions.
Exactly. As promoted before, I think today you can just deploy safes at no cost. Everything is covered, and that's fine. And I think we are right now at the stage where technology is scalable enough to offer free transactions for everyone and use other means for spam prevention and revenue streams, while still preserving non-custodial features, and that's what we have to double down on. So if you want to get more users, there's no other way.
I completely agree. And you highlighted two important points that I want to ask you about, Kristof. One is that spam prevention is something to be considered, right? If we are footing the bill for everyone's transactions, are we paying for the bots to come to the party? And so this implies the existence of an identity layer, as we decouple execution capabilities from the addresses that we are subsidizing transactions for, permitting interactions for. So from a Pimlico perspective, how do you guide developers to differentiate between these addresses and to make these decisions around subsidizing the costs of things like gas?
Yeah, so I guess it helps to give a bit of context about what paymasters we currently offer, right? Because that, I think, is a sort of guiding force for us to see how we're evolving the things that are now. So right now we have two different paymasters. One is a so-called verifying paymaster. This is simply an API endpoint we give to to someone who wants to sponsor a user operation. They can call it, and if they have any amount of Pimlico balance, it will be deducted, and we will sign up to sponsor this user operation on chain. So that's one. And in this case, the developer themselves decide under what condition they end up sponsoring the user operation. The second one is a permissionless paymaster, and it's an ERC20 paymaster, allowing a user potentially guided by a wallet developer, but the user themselves deciding that they want to pay for transaction fees with an ERC20 token. And so for this, there's no backend API, there's no like off-chain component, there's no Pimlico balance. It's just the paymaster itself withdrawing USDC or DAI or any token. So for us, like, how do we think we're going to prevent spam? How can we achieve spam prevention? I feel like we're starting slow, right? So things we've been seeing people want is, hey, I want to sponsor the first 10 user operations for this smart account, for any smart account that we deploy, and let's reset that every month, right? So something very simple, something where it's like bounded how much gas you can pay, right? That's, I think, one of the most crucial first steps, making sure you don't have an unlimited potential bill that you have to pay. But then we're very, very interested about like, okay, how about if we want to sponsor specific actions, right? Say we want our users to sponsor you calling this specific function on this smart contract. In that case, it's slightly more technically difficult because you can't do this verification on-chain. The user operation object that you analyze on-chain does not have necessary information without widespread smart account interoperability for us to understand like what it's actually doing. So we have to simulate it off-chain, and if it meets our conditions, then we would, again, sign up. And so you can imagine a sort of gas manager system where we can give more and more detailed ways for developers to decide what exactly they want to sponsor, who exactly they don't want to sponsor, with extra things like if you want this person to have at least 3 months of history on chain in some way, right? Like any of these things that that one might do when they're giving an airdrop, they should be able to do when deciding if they want to sponsor the gas fees for users. So these are some of the approaches that we're looking at right now. But again, it's going to be very incremental. It's going to be like, let's start simple, and let's give developers more capability as we see what they actually want.
So it sounds like we've got a broad range of potential capabilities, ways that you can instantiate rules to cover one transaction versus another. And it sounds like we have basically infinite flavors. So what's working right now?
What's working? Currently, the most demand we're seeing, and it is very simple, but like literally just sponsor all transactions, right? There's a bunch of new wallets popping up. They want to make the end user experience as easy as possible. And they want to set a limit to how much they will spend, but beyond that, they will just sponsor any and all transactions. And this is possible mostly because of layer 2s like Gnosis chain, where gas fees are really, really minimal. This would not be feasible on if they're mainnet, for instance.
That is super interesting that, the rallying cry, really the theme for today seems to be subsidize all the transactions, bring all the users, do all the things that suck less, which, we love, but also conflicts deeply with the philosophical origins that brought many of us into this room around self-custody and clarity through to the protocol layer. So there's this tension, right, between the sovereign austerity of manual key management, EOA is what we've come up with, and the, these crypto values versus abstracting away the protocol layer functionality in favor of friendlier interactions like Web 2 or even Web 2 itself, from TradFi Rails to logins like Google. So, we are starting to see many different ways that so-called standards are being adopted. These new, simpler, easier paths are making their way into the world. But why isn't this currently the standard at larger scale when we talk about the goal of more users? So, Stefan, I'll hand this to you first. Why are we as a crypto ecosystem still leading a conversation about wallet addresses and self-custody, when the thesis on this stage today seems to be do what it takes to get the users in, even if it is compromising some of the staunchly held philosophical beliefs about self-custody?
Well, I think the answer is very simple. Look at like who created Ethereum, who's on the stage, computer scientists, computer scientists, computer scientists, computer scientists. We want to solve engineering problems and adhering to the core values of what was initially created. And I think it's also very important to make sure that those values are respected. At the same time, I think it's also very obvious we have to make some compromises in order to drive adoption. And I think there are compromises which are, in my view, okay. Like as long as so I think non-custodial features have to be preserved. That is something we should not compromise on. But then key storage is something where there's so many flavors. It can be kind of a path towards like how much the user actually owns it. And I think there are very interesting projects trying to do this, where the key management part doesn't have to be like you don't have to burden the user from the very get-go with this kind of problem. But at a later stage, eventually, when the product becomes more relevant for him, then maybe you can ask him, okay, it makes sense for you to increase security. I mean, that's also what happens in Web 2, right? Like Web 2, usually you're not being asked to add two-factor authentication from the get-go. You get the user kind of started, and then eventually you ask the user, okay, well, it makes sense to add another way of authenticating. In my view, I'm happy to see so many projects trying to solve this. I think there are also very interesting new EIPs trying to push forward with new like curves that we can use for signing, which would allow to have better key management. I think those kind of initiatives we can also drive from a pure technical perspective. Again, pushing for EIPs that are more in line with what larger industry players are also pushing for to make things more compatible. Because ultimately, of course it's important, it's easy for you to do key management with your iPhone or your Android phone. And ultimately, this will involve talking to big players like Apple and Google, and or like working towards what they are working on. And that's what we have to do more. Fortunately, I think we are relevant enough now to actually push for that. And I'm very happy to see initiatives going in this direction. And we will also, like with Gnosis, push for that. So we are also working on a wallet where we aim to have the best user experience. We're just trying to incorporate the latest developments, maybe even kind of front-running it, to allow users to have very easy key management on your phone, where you can just tap into the existing infrastructure that Apple and others are providing. And I think then, for the user, there's no difference in using, like, I don't know, Revolut and using their fingerprint to authenticate something versus actually using a fully non-custodial wallet, having exactly the same user experience.
So it sounds like we have, a general agreement around progressive UX and progressive sovereignty as, valuable to introduce when they deliver utility to a user, but not inherent for day zero. And that means that every single team needs to independently decide what that journey of progressive UX and progressive sovereignty is. That means that each path is different, though influenced, of course, by each other and by what's being adopted. So as decentralized as our technology is, upgrade paths are centralized. They are centralized, arbitrary decisions made by teams. So Richard, what does that upgrade path look like? How do you guys talk about that in the context of SAFE?
I mean, especially in this case, when it comes to the core consensus layer for like how your assets are managed, which in our case is a SAFE contract, we give full control to the user, right? Like, so if you want to upgrade your SAFE, you have to actively do it by yourself. It's your choice. And if you choose not to upgrade, then there's not much that we can do about it. Obviously, this has some implications because, as we have outlined, right? Like, there is a limit to also what users can understand themselves and what can they do themselves without our help. And that's basically where we do still have a centralized role. And when it comes to the UI and to the support, obviously we have at some point have to nudge the owner that you have to upgrade, or you are you're left alone, right? Like we see, I think one of the examples, Lucas earlier in his opening talk actually presented the old Gnosis multisig. This is a quite old contract, but there are still instances out there that require funds, and we still by now get support requests where people ask like, hey, where's the interface, which we have taken offline more than I think 2 years ago, and we quite explicitly for multiple years said, hey, we're gonna put it offline, handle it yourself, right? Like, it's actually, this interface is so simple that it's quite trivial to host, but the more advanced our features become, also the more tricky it becomes to run all the infrastructure necessary to get the full nice UI that the users are used to from our applications. So now the users still have the full choice, right? Like, this is what self-custody means. You have the choice yourself. You have to take full You're fully accountable for your decisions. And you can either choose to say, I want to run potentially a simplified UI for my safe myself, or I want to use the hosted version, but there I have to stay up to date with this latest contract, I have to update this. It's still your choice, you are in control. That being said, obviously we do make some considerations. Like, it's one of the big topics we have been asked before, hey, safe, why didn't you go full in on 4337? It's because we have more than $50 billion worth of funds locked in the existing contracts, and we're not just going to say, sure, let's change our core implementation and get everybody to update it, right? Like, this is a little bit tricky. It's like a step, one of the values or benefits of the safe, it's battle tested for the last 5+ years. We have no major or even high security incidents. And if we do a major change to our contracts, this is basically reset to 0, at least to some level. Maybe not to 0, but it's to some level reset. So yes, so we are not moving fast, break fast. And I think this is something that in crypto is something that we need to acknowledge, that none of us really move fast, break fast. We are still thinking, we still want to move fast. We think about the existing users. There's already a lot of value locked up, and with the next billion of users that hopefully we bring onto the platform, it's going to be a lot more. So yes, why we're going to nudge the user, but they're going to still be in control, and we will think about them. But there will be a new version, and users will have to migrate if they want to experience it full.
All right, methodical improvements across the board and legacy compatibility, still something that we will figure out together. Thank you guys all so much for your attention today. Thank you so much to our panelists for keeping it spicy. Have a beautiful SafeCon, everyone.